Okay, y'all, we are live.
Hello. Um, Thank you all so much for joining us. Really excited about this conversation. And I think that it is both very timely and very old. Thinking about how we embody solidarity while holding on our individual identities, but understanding that our liberation is bound up together. My name is Bridget Burns. I am the Safe Commune Program Lead for Foundation for Liberating Minds. And I am going to tell you all just a little bit about our panelists one by one, and then pass it off to them to add a little bit more background, and we'll circle back. So first, I want to introduce Vivian Jaber. Vivian is a Palestinian organizer and a lead organizer with Oklahomans Against Occupation, which is a grassroots group that politicizes, mobilizes, and organizes for Palestinian liberation in Oklahoma City. Through local action, community building, Vivian grounds her work in the belief that liberation is collective and interconnected. Thank you so much for joining us, Vivian. Is there anything you would like to share with us about why you are joining this conversation today?
Yeah, I'm excited to be here and to be sharing space with everyone here. And, I think this is definitely a timely conversation. A lot of our communities are, facing attack from the state and from, the same systems that are oppressing all of us. So definitely a good time to start having these conversations on how we can embody solidarity and, work with each other in tandem to our collective goals. So I'm excited to be here and to hear from everyone.
Next, I am going to introduce Jackii Luna. Jackii is a queer Latina artist, teacher, and organizer. She is the executive director of Act Now OKC. That is a mutual aid-based community organization that works to empower, educate, and elevate communities in need in Oklahoma. Her work includes the Sin Límites, a program designed to educate Latina youth about Latin American history, boost their community engagement, and increase their access to higher education. Thanks so much for joining us, Jackii. Anything you would like to say to the space as we open it up today?
Just excited to be here. I think you covered it all. But yes, I'm so excited to be here and get to talk to you guys about this.
Thank you. Next, we have Aurelius Francisco. Aurelius is an African American man who was born and raised in Northeast Oklahoma City. That is the historically Black part of Oklahoma City. His family has witnessed the community become established, be broken up by racist urban renewal policies and mass incarceration. And he has also been an integral part of the ongoing fight to restore and liberate the community there. He is our co-founder of the Foundation for Liberating Minds and is acting as our executive director. Aurelius, welcome to the space. Anything you would like to share with the group?
No, thank you, Bridget. Thanks for the invite. It's nice to be with you all and to everyone watching. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And yeah, really excited to dig into this conversation.
Beautiful. So I'm going to share a little bit more about myself as well. Um, I am obviously racialized as a white woman in the United States. My people come from Ireland, Italy, and France. I see people talk about, I don't know, like I know a lot of people who have both Irish and Italian ancestry, and that's not, by accident. They're both very Catholic countries, very different countries, but very Catholic countries. And the way that Catholic people have been categorized in the United States has looked pretty different throughout time. And I also think we're in a really interesting time in that regard. Um, a lot of Catholic communities were more marginalized in the US until about the 1970s or so. My ancestors have always taught me that solidarity is a part of my Irish identity. My Irish family are very good storytellers and record keepers. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that. I was always taught that capitalism and colonialism have caused deep harm. And I think that that was definitely linked to my Irish ancestors' experience. But I think that my understanding of colonialism has continued to grow really through my relationships with other people and to like really understand the living, breathing effects of colonialism. I think that only comes through relationship. And I also find it interesting just thinking, so I identifying as a cultural Catholic, I was taught that being Catholic was part of resisting colonial rule in Ireland, but that's very funny looking at the rest of the colonized world, many of whom were colonized at the hands of the Catholic Church. And I think anytime we're talking about organizing in a historical and ethnic context, that is going to come up. My work with food sovereignty and ancestral healing has really led me to transformative justice as a commune program lead. And I am really grateful to be with you all today. Okay. So now let's get into the questions. So we talked a little bit about this in intros, but I would like to open us up to move beyond our like bio voices and faces into our storytelling voices and faces, and think about what lineages we carry with us today. And anyone who would like to start, go for it.
I can go first. So I am of Mexican descent. My family is from Chihuahua, Mexico. We're from a small border town near Texas called El Porvenir. I identify as a Chicana because I was born in the U.S. And have, I don't know, had to assimilate to parts of being in the U.S., and the American experience. Yeah, so that's the lineage that I carry. Did I answer that properly? Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Whatever. I think this is one of those questions, like a question we ask in community circles is, who are you? That could be your name. That could be a really long story that, comes out. So just whatever you're holding and thinking today.
Yeah, I can go next. So I am Palestinian in diaspora. My lineage traces back generations to a small village in Palestine called Der Debouan. It's a Fallahi village, so it's kind of like a rural area, lots of farmland and olive groves, and that's where I came from. We actually have like a very specific like dialect that's kind of like distinguished from other Palestinian dialects. So we're like recognizable even amongst like Arabs just because of the way we speak. And so yeah, I'm Fallahi through and through. That's where my ancestry comes from. My parents came to the U.S. In the 90s from Der Debouan because the economy in Palestine is pretty suffocated. It can be hard to build like a stable life living under a military occupation. So like a lot of Palestinians, here I am in diaspora. But if there's one thing that you'll learn about Palestinians, if you ever meet a Palestinian, is that we have a very strong connection to our lineage and on our homeland, regardless of whether we've ever stepped foot there or not. We still feel a calling to Palestine. We also are deeply connected to resistance and like the concepts of resistance. It's kind of ingrained in like all of our culture, even from like the clothes we wear, like the kufiyeh or like the tatris dresses that Palestinian women wear, to the like principles that are kind of instilled in us growing up of like being determined to return to our homeland, being determined to free our homeland from colonization. It's kind of ingrained in everything we do. And I'm also a mom, and I have my partner's Latino, so I have two little girls that are half Palestinian and half Mexican, and it definitely is like a challenging time and a very powerful time to be raising kids when it feels like every like intersection of their identity is kind of under attack right now. And it's definitely highlighted to me that solidarity isn't just like something that's symbolic. It's something that like we should be embodying in everything that we do, because I can't advocate for like half of my child and leave the other half behind, right? So it's definitely this conversation really resonates with me because of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Vivian. So for me, yeah, I'm black. I'm a black American. I identify as black. I'm a multi-generational Oklahoman. So my uh, several generations back, my people who I'm directly descended from uh, made a home here in Oklahoma. Some fleeing a violent South Louisiana region specifically. Um, and that's important to me for a number of reasons, namely because I choose to be here. I know there's a lot of talk for young people in Oklahoma going to other places that seem like better, seem bluer, seem like the grass is greener. And I made the intentional decision to stay here and to build this organization and to work here and to give what I can to this community. And a part of that is because like I am Oklahoma and Oklahoma is me. And like I feel that deeply in sort of my familial traditions and practices and things of that nature. Beyond sort of that lineage, I identify with the Black radical tradition, which is a sort of concept coined by Cedric Robinson in a great book called Black Marxism. The Black radical tradition is all about the ways that Black people, people of African descent across the diaspora, have always resisted colonialism, have always resisted white supremacy from the very first day that we were stolen from the western shores of Africa and trafficked across the Atlantic. We have resisted that oppression. We have resisted that white supremacist violence. And that radical tradition is really profound to me because it isn't as though we chose to be here some centuries ago, and yet we are here and have made our home and have built this country. Is the reality. And so to think of myself and try to position my work as part of a long arc of resistance, but also of building home, of building community, of building safety, of building, all of these things that allow for our thriving as Black people and across identities and community groups is super, super important. And I think also a part of that Black radical tradition is a solidarity that shows up for other people, that connects the dots between issues, right? That speaks to the ways that anti-Black racism um, is a force of oppression that shows up in a lot of different ways in different communities, and yet and still we have always and continue to show up for different people who look differently, from different places, different regions, what have you. And so I believe I'm just following in the footsteps of so many great Black leaders who have done that. And we can talk more, about what that looks like in practice. Um, I also am married to an immigrant, a Mexican immigrant. Um, and that is very important to me because I love her dearly, and also her family and herself and her community are under attack right now. And so, I think I kind of sit at this interesting place where it's one thing to talk about it and practice it when it's your friends. It's another thing when it's directly in your home and directly impacting, uh, you know, your loved ones, immediate family. And so, what's going on right now with the Republican administration's attacks on um, immigrants of all statuses is really troubling to me, and is a major, major reason why, I try to get up and try to show up in solidarity and try to show up to fight against these policies that are attacking immigrants. So I'll stop there.
Beautiful. Thank you, Aurelius. Um, mm. I When I think about what I'm carrying, I've thought a lot, especially since I started this healing work through the Safe Commune, about what it means to be a storyteller, um, who gets to be a storyteller, what stories get to be told, um, what are the lessons that are preserved through those stories. And I think about my relationship with my grandmother, um, and her relationship with her grandmother, and how that is how a lot of our family stories were preserved. I think a lot about intergenerational connection. I think, particularly on my Irish side, um, I think we have sort of a long line of like lonely grandkids connecting with their grandparents in a special way. When I was a child, I had a lot of trouble in school, a lot of trouble learning to read. And I was taken out of school a lot for that reason. So I didn't really know my peers, they didn't really know me. And that led to various levels of bullying and isolation. And I think it also taught me a lot about the way children are taught in this country very early to police any kind of difference. Um, and while I grew up going to very white schools, the small number of children of color that were there were the ones who would stick up for me when I needed it, even if we were not friends, and would show me like some level of care and dignity. So when I was 9 in 2001, I wrote a letter to George W. Bush on my American Girl doll stationery, explaining why we should not go to war and all the problems I thought it would cause, and the children that I was worried about who were going to experience violence and things. My grandmother, who was the daughter of an Irish immigrant, but born in 1910. So my grandparents were quite a bit older than a lot of my other peers. Was so upset that he did not answer me. There was like no response. Not only that he did not listen, but he did not answer. So we became pen pals from when I was about 9 to when I was 15. And this was in her 90s. And she would write to me about, like I would write to her about my experiences, and she would write to me about her experiences at that age. Which included spending a great deal of time with her Irish grandmother, and then her mother immigrated from Ireland. And I think when I think about solidarity in this time where immigrants are being criminalized, being abducted, being attacked, I think about how my great grandmother was terrified that she was going to be deported until the day she died. During the cholera epidemic in the early 1900s, she was so scared that they were going, like, anytime they had to go to quarantine a couple of times, and she always thought it was a trick that they were trying to deport her. And I think sometimes my family tells the story as like a charming, cute kind of thing, but that is like literally the reality of Black and brown immigrants right now. Is that people are being tricked, people are being captured. And I think when I think about embodying solidarity as a person who's racialized as white in the United States, I think that a large part of that is not forgetting that I am still the descendant of immigrants. I am on native land. And I have an obligation and also a just deep, like that's what solidarity is, that deep connection that is there, like whether, I feel like I'm like looking for a different word, but we really are bound together. In Irish, there's a saying, Arscatha Kayla Averna Dana, which is in each other's shadows, the people survive. Or we live in each other's shadows. And I think that speaks a lot to like how I've been able to fill in holes of what happened, what stories I have from my family through connections with Indigenous peoples here, especially organizing against pipelines and doing more work to connect to the earth, largely because I was doing more like ancestral connection work. And I felt like I could hear my ancestors better around trees, around forests, around green things. And then I would learn about these like gaps that I had in my knowledge of like the Irish American experience from absentee Shawnee people, from Choctaw people, especially. And I just think that I think it said a lot that like we're all related, we're all family, but I don't think we think very much about like what that means. Like I feel like when I'm speaking to people of different backgrounds, when I'm organizing with them, like I'm speaking to my cousins, and my cousins have this bit of information, and I have this bit of information, and together we could potentially build a full story.
Love that.
So, I want to take us to the next question. And we started with this, but I think like these things are connected. So the first question was, what lineages do you carry with you? And the second question is, how does solidarity relate to your lineages and identity today? So we'd love to circle back to our reflections about what we're carrying, and where we have seen that pop up in our current organizing. I had spoken a little bit about, this experience of the anxious immigrant mother, having a maternal figure who you worry about, and I think this is something that like I remember like my grandma felt that worry for her mother really like throughout her life, and that had a lot to do with like who she became as a storyteller. But my grandma also grew up in a town where most children went to work at age 12. She remembered going to a lot of very somber 12-year-old birthday parties because it was like the last time that most of these kids would see their friends, before they went into the mills, which was also very dangerous work. So like not only were they like working long hours and probably couldn't see their friends very much, but there were a lot of injuries, a lot of death. And I remember being in school and learning about, put this in heavy quotes, the end of child labor. And it being taught as if it was sort of just like this natural progression that Americans were like, I don't think we should have kids working. Let's just stop that. And then when I would talk to my grandmother about that, she was very much like, that's not what happened. Like I remember seeing children my age going on strike, being shot by police. I remember like all of these different levels of strife and tension and violence. And also, this is not something that I think she was aware of or told me, but I remember learning it around the same time. Child labor still very much exists in the United States because of racist labor law. It is still legal for children as young as 6 or 7 to work in the fields picking produce. It is still legal for children to work as domestic workers. And then also in this era of the Trump administration, we have seen a lot of child labor protections that do exist getting pushed back. In Arkansas, there was a viral article about this, about like finding 14-year-olds working overnight shifts. In Idaho, something similar. So like when I think about, again, like remembering, and like my grandmother was able to finish school, but that was also something that she always like realized was a privilege, and that was like because her mother had protected her, and that was not possible for a lot of other people. And as I think about honoring her and also honoring my ancestors before that, her grandmother would tell her this story about, this was when their family moved to Lancashire, England, which was a coal mining community that was mined by Irish immigrants almost exclusively. And there was a cave-in one day, and there was a little boy who was 12 who got stuck, who was working in the mine. And there was a grown man working next to him, who he reached out for his help and grabbed his belt, and the man took his belt off and left him behind in the cave-in. And then there was a mule who worked on the site, who crawled into the cave-in and pulled the little boy out. And it's a really simple story, but there was sort of this spirit in like the way my great-great-grandmother would tell my grandmother this, and the way my grandmother would tell us this, that the earth and like nature as a collective cares for us genuinely in a way that like capitalism can't, and people who are surviving capitalism can't. Yeah. I would love to hear your reflections on this second question.
Vivian, Jackii, y'all want to go, or I can go?
You can go ahead, Aurelius.
Okay, I will go. Yeah, so one thing that I didn't mention is that both my mother and father's parents passed before I was born and before either of my older siblings were born. And so this question about lineages is interesting for me. And like just reflecting, Bridget, you talking so much about, your experiences with your grandparents. That's something I didn't have, right? So like that direct sort of lineage it's cut off, for me, for a number of things that you could get into with each of their lives and the reasons that they passed away, um, racism in the healthcare industry, and community violence and other things, right? Um, but that's important for me, I think, to think about, because when I think about my lineages, it is namely in my learning as a student, and sort of yearning for connection to a history that I wasn't directly connected to in the familial sense. And so learning about history, and especially like Black history, has been really, really crucial for me, and has allowed me to learn so much about solidarity, in the ways that, again, Black people have always resisted, always built something better, always worked to build a country that allowed us to exist and survive and thrive, even when this country was not built for that purpose. It was built for us to labor and never to benefit from that labor. but also as I reflect on this question, I think about like my parents and the ways that they showed up in solidarity, and like not big flashy ways, but in the ways of conversations with our extended family, our cousins and their siblings, and so on and so forth, around especially like just decent uh, human connection with queer people, LGBTQ people, right? And how that was like such a taboo topic in at family gatherings or at family reunions, right? And how it was really just like normal, and we would just talk about folks in queer relationships and people who identify differently as just like any of us in our family, right? And how that was really, really important for me uh, in my growing up in different spaces at school, but also in the community that I grew up in. And still comes up, right? Like, so those same lessons from my childhood around, um, some of my sister's closest friends who were gay, who we played with just like anybody else, right? Um, it still comes up today in conversations that I have with my friends or at community events when people ask why FLM does so much work with LGBTQ led organizations or focused organizations, or why we make statements in support of um, transgender affirming healthcare, right? Like, because those things are seen as a distraction or seen as different or seen as separate from quote unquote Black issues, right? And so my understanding of solidarity is, one, to connect these dots and to learn from historical figures as well as my parents,
Mhm.
folks like Audre Lorde and Angela Davis, right? Who stood at these intersections of Black and queer identity,
Mhm.
um, of race, being marginalized at the intersections of race and gender, right? And seeing how these systems of oppression weren't separate, but were one and the same, right? And that continues to be important for me. The same extent, right? Malcolm X was one of the first people I looked up to in sixth grade. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. It was like summer reading for me, changed my whole sort of outlook, right? And I remember sitting in English class that year. I read By Any Means Necessary for one of our speech competitions. I got third place, but I feel like I should have got first. And I got third place because it was a little too radical for my little charter school in Oklahoma City. Um, but thinking about Malcolm X's life and legacy and the ways that he stood for different communities and the ways that he fought so fervently, right, for Black people, and also, right, spoke up against the ongoing struggle for Palestinian liberation, right? Like, I think about Angela Davis, and like, I'm an abolitionist, right? And Angela Davis was like the first sort of um, grounding figure of me in the abolitionist movement, right? And the ways that abolition understands that what we are working to abolish and what we are working to build has to include a sort of a global solidarity, a solidarity with people across the world who are struggling against colonialism and struggling against racist regimes, right? And so we have to be as fervent and as passionate and show up as best we can for Palestinian people as we would for Black people in the United States who are being brutalized by the police, right? And those are lessons that I take into today, and thinking about how we show up, how I show up as an individual, how an organization that I lead shows up in different spaces, and the voices that we work to bring in, and how we work to connect the dots and to make it as normal, again, as natural as anything else, right? Um, and so that has been, it's an ongoing sort of learning process, right? I think, and most organizers I talk to, we always feel like we're not doing enough. That we aren't doing enough around a given issue or around solidarity, especially because there's you know so much mess, man, so much madness and hate and violence going on across the world. It's difficult, right, to give our full selves to all of these different issues, right? Um, and so what I sort of rest on is this idea that these things are interconnected. And if I am fighting against a given campaign or issue or fight, working to try to put a crack into this behemoth that is racial capitalism, that is white supremacy, that is settler colonialism, that I'm working to put a crack in all of these various fights across the world or across issues or across communities. And so those are lineages and lessons from um, so many Black folks who have worked to not be boxed in or caged in into a single issue or into an idea of there are Black issues and there's everything else. And um, I see that really keenly right now, which is disheartening to me, around an oppression Olympics, this like competitive nature of like, well, Latinos didn't stand up for us in 2020, or Latinos are anti-Black, and so why should I, be out there loud, fighting against ICE and fighting against the deportation pipeline, right? Or Palestinians ain't never done nothing for me, and so why am I going get up out of bed, or not vote in an election or what have you, for them, right? And a lot of these things are ahistorical, right? There have been solidarity across communities um, throughout history, but also I think it's like a natural and valid feeling to feel like enough people aren't paying attention to me, to my community, to what my family is experiencing, right? And that can be difficult. And I think we got to wrestle with that tension. I don't have a solution for it, but I think a potential step in the right direction is to understand, right, that one, you could take any given issue and you can find some Black people who are being oppressed by that issue. And so if you want to make something a Black issue, you can make it a Black issue, right? Like Black, queer, and trans people exist. So if you wonder why transgender issues, should be fought against, and
Mm-hmm.
by Black people, then there you have it, right? Like there are Black immigrants, right? Like there are Black people from the Caribbean who are being targeted at disproportionate rates, right? So if you wonder why you should be fighting against ICE, you got some Black people there, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it shouldn't always have to be somebody who looks like me or identifies as I do for me to show up to say that this is wrong. And as a person of consciousness, as a person who is aware of these things, that like I have a duty, a responsibility, a moral obligation, whatever you want to say, to fight against it, right? And it doesn't have to be me. And I think as a Black person, I try to practice that. And the best thing that I can do is that favor, that solidarity is returned by uh, Latinos, is returned by Palestinians, is returned by white people, is returned by white, queer, and trans folks, right? So on and so forth. Um, and I think I have examples of those very people, like all of you on this call and others, doing that, right? Returning that solidarity. And that this is not a transactional exchange, but it is about understanding that our fights are the same. And so we have to be pushing together. So.
I appreciate how like vulnerable and real you're being in that conversation, because I think we can probably um, all identify with that same like struggle of our communities not identifying with an issue and questioning why they should rally around it. So I think it's a really powerful thing to acknowledge, and Yeah, and I just appreciate your honesty. That also exists in the Palestinian community too, right? But there are moments of solidarity within my lineage. I think Palestinians see themselves a lot in other issues that impact like marginalized communities. Like we're all facing the same systems of oppression, like, you know, capitalism and white supremacy and colonization, and, you know, all under this umbrella of imperialism. And all these systems are working together to oppress us and exploit us and ultimately divide us so that they can, you know, so the elite and the wealthy can continue making money off of us. But one example of solidarity that that from my, you know, from my people that I reflect on frequently is the way Palestinians, especially Palestinians in Gaza, responded to the BLM movement and the murder of George Floyd. Um, After George Floyd was murdered, there were several like murals of him that popped up on the apartheid walls in Palestine. Um, and I was going to read a quote from one of the muralists named Taki Spatin, who said, "I want everyone who walks by this wall to see this mural of George Floyd and remember him and honor him. I want the people in America who see this mural to know that we in Palestine are standing with them because we know what it's like to be strangled every day." And I remember like following George Floyd's murder and the protests, how Palestinians in Gaza were tweeting protesters in the U.S. like tips on how to combat like, you know, tear gas and pepper spray and police violence. And I think that was just a really beautiful show of like solidarity between Palestinians and Black people in the U.S. Um, and, you know, like you called out Aurelius, like these the oppression is like very tangibly connected too, right? It's not just like symbolically connected. Like a lot of US police departments train with the Israeli occupation forces, and there's even evidence that the like technique that was used to murder George Floyd was first like deployed against Palestinians in the West Bank. And then even like looking at like the prison systems and how the prisons in the US and in Israel are both like privatized, and they target people based off of race, and they target like, you know, based off of politics, ultimately to make money. And surveillance technologies that are used against Palestinians are now being used against the migrant community here in the US. And we're seeing literal concentration camps pop up for our migrant families. And this policy of like separating families has been has been used against Palestinians for decades. And, you know, we're seeing that same playbook play out against the Latino community. So quite literally, like the tools of oppression are like deployed against my people in Palestine, and then I see them used here against, you know, my people in the US. And it really kind of highlights how important it is that we see our struggles as connected, and then also unite in our resistance against these oppressive systems. So yeah, I'll end it there.
Yes. I appreciate everything that you guys. Oh, sorry, I clicked out of the screen. Oh, okay, sorry. I really appreciate everything that you guys said. I really resonated with what you shared, Aurelius, about learning more about like Black history and how that has related to your understanding of your lineage and how that shaped your identity. I think through my experience with Sin Limites, I found myself a lot of times learning alongside our students as we learned about the Young Lords and as we learned about the Brown Berets and how they were directly inspired by the Black Panthers. And also just through my education was I obtained my bachelor's degree in human relations. Learning more, I remember reading about Angela Davis's Freedom is a Constant Struggle, and a lot of the themes that you're bringing up really resonated with me because I understood in a bigger, I understood in a more, I don't know how to say it, like in a more holistic context or perspective, how our struggles are interconnected, and the importance of transnational solidarity. And I think that's really inspired my like push to want to advocate for and support Palestinians, both in Palestine and here in the U.S. So yeah, I really appreciated what you guys both said. I don't have too much to add because you guys said so much, like many things that were already on my mind. But yes, thank you.
Ooh, this is a really beautiful conversation, and I think that I wanna circle back to what Aurelia said about like how we feel so often like we're not doing enough as organizers, because the the big bad, the like upper class, the like white supremacist machine of colonialism and the military industrial complex and the prison industrial complex is so wide. And I think that one that brings up for me like a bigger need to understand solidarity, because like no one person is ever going to be able to topple those things. Like that's actually impossible. And I've been reading Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hersey. And one of a major point she made about this that I've been sitting with a lot is that a lot of the time the need to like rush and not rest, because she's talking about this big rest deficit in the US, is ego, is this like, well, I have to be the one to do it, so I cannot rest. So I think a lot of solidarity is also about trust, trusting that our comrades will do the part of the work that we can't hold right now. Trusting that if you take a break, you can come back. Trusting that our connections are stronger than one protest or one action or one post. Before we move to the last question, I want to share, we'll be promoting this a little bit more, but we're going to be doing basically a seasonal solidarity circle. And it's especially for organizers who don't have room to process these feelings in other spaces. Because I think a lot of the time we, especially when we are doing like this like direct support work, it doesn't really feel like you can stop and think about all of your feelings and what's coming up about your grandma, or what's coming up about, this part of your family history, or this resentment to another group that has hurt you, but also whose liberation is linked to yours. Those are really complicated feelings. And so we are going to be doing that. September 2nd will be our first one, and then that'll be the one for the summer, and then we'll be picking another date in winter. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, I'll bring us to our last question. So what does it look like to embody solidarity in a mixed community? I do want to go back to this, like, I think an integral part of that is remembering where each of us come from and what each of us is like bringing and carrying. I think Irish Americans particularly are in a really interesting place right now, because there was a time where we were not as accepted as we are now in the US. There was a time where the Klan, for example, like really, really hated us too. That was like another component of family history that I grew up with, like hearing about the Klan threatening Catholics, especially. I remember a few months ago there was a flyer circulating in Kentucky about a Klan meeting, and this was around when they were saying, when the lie about Haitians are going to break into your house and eat your cats was like in the news. And that reminded me of these stories that my family would tell about, like the Klan saying that Catholics were cannibals, and that is why we were not to be trusted, or like one reason why we were not to be trusted. And I also have seen this like I would say about like 8 years ago, when I would tell people I was Irish, especially white people, they would be like, "Were you born there?" And I would be like, "No," and they're like, "I don't think that's a thing. I don't think that counts." Because I think we have been like so removed about like we don't really even understand. A lot of us, we are meant to not understand what ethnicity is, what heritage is, what history is. So, you know, I wasn't saying I was an Irish national, like that would be talking about nationality. I was saying, but like ethnically, I am Irish. Like that is the ancestry that I carry, and like it is a thing, whether I, you know, am categorized that everywhere or not. And then I remember seeing a Trump rally that was also a St. Patrick's Day parade. And I showed it to my dad, and he got so upset. He was like so distraught and confused. And he's also a sociologist, so he's like, you know, like what are the things that happened like to get us from here to here, to be like getting threatened by the Klan regularly, being like somewhat socially conscious, and coming from like a lineage of Irish resistance fighters who experienced colonialism, to having a Heritage Day that is about a fascist. And I think that with Palestine especially, there has been this resurgence of this conversation of like, what does that mean to be Irish? And I think there is this decision being made in Ireland and in the United States, of people who are, to be Irish is like this thing that does not include solidarity, or to be Irish is solidarity. Especially with Palestine, like there was a group called the Black and Tans, and then one called the Auxies that were like British colonial forces in the 1920s in Ireland. Who the Black and Tans were like the police force. The Auxies were like really just there to kind of torment people and make life uncomfortable. And then when the southern counties gained independence, in the later, like after the revolution in like the later 20s, that same group of people, like the same exact people, not just the same force, but the same people were sent to Palestine as peacekeeping forces, to guard early Jewish settlers, as they were invading Palestine. And so like when we see solidarity actions, especially in the north of Ireland, which is still occupied, if you go like look at Belfast murals, for example, like there's so much like solidarity in Ireland are bound together, kind of art. And not just that, there's one of their most famous ones. There's this big like freedom mural. Leonard Peltier is the largest face, who's an indigenous activist who was just recently released from prison, after being wrongfully incarcerated for decades. Marcus Garvey is in the mural. A lot of other freedom leaders, I can't remember everyone, but like there is this understanding that like the people who are still experiencing colonialism, like there are people in Ireland who will be like, like colonialism's over. Like the British Empire doesn't even exist anymore, when like their neighbors, just a few counties north, are still being occupied and are like pouring their hearts out to Palestinians for that reason. I could talk about this for days, and I'm like going a little too long now. But I just think that it's the way that we do this is remembering where we come from, and remembering that truly like we are all of the earth and we are of each other. You know, we do have a few more minutes if anyone wants to share any thoughts on like this question of organizing in a mixed community is our own level.
Yeah. So I'll try to keep it short, but I just want to share a few thoughts or reflections on like organizing in a mixed community. I think that especially like when it comes to Palestine, there are like a few things that organizers and organizations can do to like embody solidarity. Um, and so, like, one of them is, an obvious one that we should be listening to, like marginalized voices, right? Because we exist and we've been here and we've been organizing and we've been resisting. And there's kind of this narrative at times that happens of like, we're advocating for the voiceless, but it's like the voices are there. So one way that we should embody solidarity is by listening to those voices. Um, but also when it comes to the Palestine movement, it's also very important to be able to put like our money where our mouth is when it comes to showing solidarity for Palestinians. And one way that happens is by being conscious of like who we're platforming, and not normalizing Zionists in spaces that are progressive. So because like giving a platform to Zionists is kind of legitimizing their ideology, and that ideology is being used to genocide Palestinians to this day. Um, so maintaining like, principled lines around like not platforming Zionists is a way to show solidarity. Um, and also having a understanding of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, the BDS movement, and like adhering to those standards in organizing. So cutting financial ties with corporations that are benefiting from our displacement, our surveillance, and ultimately the genocide of Palestinians. Um, and I'll just end it by saying that like you know I think we all have kind of touched on this throughout this conversation, but like Palestine isn't like a single issue. They're all connected, right? Palestine is kind of the convergence and the manifestation of every social and political issue that every marginalized group is facing right now. Um, Whether that's like colonization or, policing or the prison complex or surveillance. So fighting for Palestine, standing with Palestine, is also standing against these systems that are oppressing all of our communities. Um, and I think it's important that, like, we kind of recognize that, um, or having solidarity in mixed communities is kind of like recognizing the progressive forces within our communities and choosing to work together intentionally, and choosing to work together in like principled alignment, um, and in our actions, and having like a shared struggle at the end of the day. Um, yeah, I mean, it's been um, empowering and um, deeply impactful to hear like everyone's perspective and the way we all like recognize how deeply connected our struggles are.
Absolutely. Um, I would just share um, that I think connection is really important. We talk about the crux of organizing is relationship building. We build relationships to build power, um, and connecting with people in your community. Um, Even though our neighborhoods are still quite segregated, there's a likelihood that there are Black people in your community. There's a strong likelihood that there are Latinos in your community. There's a strong likelihood that there are Arabs and white people and so on and so forth in your community. And so just working, at FLM, we do canvassing, we do door to door knocking across the East Side. And I've seen that reality, right, around different people who live in my community, right, who aren't just Black people. And so that connection is really important. And in the same way for people of other backgrounds to connect and build relationships with Black people, because it's a lot harder to ignore somebody's oppression or different issues or a really bad policy or the continued billions of dollars sent to the Israeli regime when you know somebody. Uh, who's directly impacted or has somebody over there, or when you are connected with someone who lives there, right? And so I think connection is important. And that last thing I would say is just um, we are different. So I don't want to confuse this idea that our struggles are interconnected. These systems of oppression are impacting us in similar yet different ways. But the reality is that we are different, right? And like this comes from the lessons of Audre Lorde. Like, don't shield away from the fact that like we're different. Like we have different cultural practices, we have different music tastes. We're all incredibly different, right? And that isn't something to divide us, because that is what the state tries to do. Tries to segregate us and separate us, but that is something that makes a really beautiful mosaic of a community, right? And so I think a lot, at FLM, we talk about dreaming radically. When I dream to a future where Palestinians are able to return uh, to their native land, when I dream of a future where immigrants are able to come and go across borders as they please, when I dream of a future where Black people are no longer shackled within the carceral state, when I dream of a future where, white workers are able to connect to their ancestry beyond whiteness in the same way that Bridget has, um, and are able to benefit from their labor in a different way than the capitalist system sort of forces upon us. That is a multiracial future, right? Like that is a multi-ethnic future. There are varying genders and sexualities and relationships, and like it's there's difference all over the place, and like that's really fucking beautiful. And it allows, I think, us to understand that like those differences don't have to divide us, but are where we can connect.
Mhm.
um, but also to remember that like, yeah, like I can say that there's anti-blackness within every single issue and within every system, right? And that is true. That is a factual statement. And it's important to say that like I, as a Black American, am experiencing a very different form of violence than what Palestinians are experiencing in Gaza. I'm experiencing a very different form of violence than what Black people in Haiti are experiencing, or Black people in Sudan and Congo. I also want to bring up these other global fights, uh, genocides that are ongoing at the hands, or connected to, at the very least, U.S. imperialism, in addition to the fight for Palestinian liberation. And so those points of difference can be really big and scary, and also are opportunities to learn and to connect and to try our best to do what we can with what we have. And I think that's the obligation that we have, is to do what we can with what we have. So I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate all of y'all.
Appreciate you as well. Jackii, did you want to add anything before I close out?
Sorry, could you remind me of the question?
How do we embody solidarity in mixed communities?
I think pulling from what Aurelius said, connection definitely, and then what Vivian said is just showing up for other folks, and whenever they're struggling, however that may see or however that may look. For me, it's just listening to those around me whenever they are in need, like listening to Palestinians that are in need of just emotional support or also financial support whenever I can. Whether that's fundraising or just personally donating. I think that's something I would add to your list, Vivian, is that people really need money, and that would really help out a lot. So that's another way of embodying solidarity. And I do also want to say that it is difficult to do this work and embody solidarity in this mixed community. I think because a lot of people maybe aren't at the level of consciousness or understanding that we're at whenever we're having these discussions, like what even is solidarity.
Mhm.
or what does transnational solidarity look like, or how are our struggles interconnected? So it is difficult as well whenever you're trying to dream radically and to move towards something like Palestinian liberation and advocate for these things whenever you're still feeling like people don't understand why it should even matter to them. So I will also say it is difficult, but I think that a conversation like this can definitely help. I feel like, or at least I hope that this helped other people. It definitely helped me at least to even feel more inspired and empowered to continue to do these things and to continue working with folks just like you guys.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just being with the three of you for this hour has been, I think, really good for my soul, my energy. I've joked with Aurelius before that I am actually just an old Irish man who should be on a pub stool in a pub and just talking to all my friends about history and listening to music, dancing and stuff. That's where I'm actually supposed to be. Trying to build that in my life. And so I, really want to appreciate everything y'all said. I'm trying to like make it so I'm not completely washed out by the sun, but Aurelius, I really especially appreciate your point that like we are all really different, and that's also our strength. I reflect back on the value of biodiversity a lot when I think about this. That like if you're planting a garden, a monocrop is not good for the soil. It leads to bad things for the soil, for your health. It's like it's less nutritious. It's more maintenance for the plants because you're having to like build all of these things that should naturally be coming from other plants, from worms, from like from all of these different pieces that you need, right? And I would love for us to build an interdependent community that understands that we survive through each other, for better or worse, and that it is in the interest of the oppressive forces to keep us divided. And when we are divided, especially on the internet, asking who is that benefiting and where is that coming from? Even if the points are true, why are we seeing it in this particular way? Why are we seeing like this particular clip and this particular question? And I think one way that we can cut through that is maintaining our relationships. So that is the vision for these solidarity circles. Love to see y'all at our first one on September 2nd. We're also going to be starting a similar but sort of different space, our Dream Radically circles. So those are going to be discussing like how do we build like particularly like the interdependence and kind of systems that we're talking about. It's like a radical imagination space, if you will, that will probably have some like offshoot projects and conversations. Whereas the Embodying Solidarity Circle will be like really focusing on like that question of like those tensions of like who are you having trouble like having positive feelings towards for better or worse because of resentment, because of harm. What are the like legacies you're wanting to preserve? What are like all of those different feelings? So that's going to be starting the following Tuesday, September 9th. And then that's going to be every other Tuesday in person from 6 to 8. And then we'll have a virtual option on the weeks in between to reach a wider audience. So I'd love to see y'all there, see our wider audience there. And thank you all for tuning in to Foundation for Liberating Minds, our community safety series. We'll see y'all later.